Hi, I'm Stewart Spinks and welcome to episode 307 of my podcast, Beekeeping Short and Sweet. I've recently been speaking to a number of other beekeepers and all agree it's been one of the most difficult starts to a beekeeping season in many years. Some beekeepers are still feeding their bees as we pass the summer solstice. For me, I've just started to take off the spring honey crop, what honey there is, but I'm grateful we've survived with strong colonies for the summer. Beekeeping Short and Sweet, a beekeeping podcast for the inquisitive beekeeper with a short attention span. A beekeeper, in fact, just like me. This week's podcast is sponsored in part by Modern Beekeeping, suppliers of general beekeeping equipment including high-density polyhives. These include Paradise National hives, Swenty polyhives and of course Honeypore hives, my particular favourite. More than this, Modern Beekeeping also supply traditional cedar and pine hives, a range of very effective bee feeds called Apimix and Apipasta, and a full range of all the must-have beekeeping equipment for every beekeeper. For all your beekeeping needs, contact Paul at Modern Beekeeping by visiting their website www.modernbeekeeping.co.uk. Hi everyone. I hope you're all well and enjoying some warmer weather to carry out your inspections. Oh, before I forget, happy belated summer solstice. The 21st of June was our longest day of the year, and actually we had some lovely warm and sunny weather to celebrate. It seems almost ridiculous then that I'm still talking to beekeepers, bee farmers in particular, who've had to continue to feed bees right up to last week. It has been a very difficult year so far for so many beekeepers, and we haven't escaped the challenges ourselves. I think I've been lucky in that my biggest issues came very early in the season when we had the briefest of warm weeks and a large number of my colonies decided to swarm. Lucky because it allowed the colonies enough time to regroup, requeen and start building again, to the point that now the vast majority of these colonies have built themselves back to full strength just in time for the summer nectar flow. I finally managed to remove some early spring honey from our colonies this week. This is mostly oilseed rape honey and is only a few boxes off a couple of colonies. The good news is I've added clearer boards to the remaining colonies that have any honey to come off, and we should be able to get that back to the unit and extracted early next week. On the subject of clearer boards, don't stress too much if you can't get back to your hives as soon as you want to remove the supers, because once cleared they do tend to stay empty for some time afterwards. For the majority of back garden beekeepers, you should have a pretty good idea of where your bees are at and what you can expect from your bees this summer in terms of a honey crop. Take a walk around your local area or have a look on any one of the online maps that are out there, and you'll see all the areas near your hives where bees are likely to forage. At the moment, my absolute favourite is brambles, and we're very lucky to have vast patches of them at most of our apiary sites. This year in particular, it seems to be a very good year for brambles. We have plants that are so covered with flowers that it looks like there are more flowers than leaves. The earliest ones have set fruit already, and I think it's going to be a very good year for blackberries. Locally to my home address, the lime trees have started to flower. That's not the citrus variety, of course, and I've often thought I should try to find a secure location to set up some hives, if only for this 4-week period, to benefit from the nectar flow. There are a significant number of lime trees here, and I'm sure it would produce well. Something to think about for next year, maybe. Over at the farm apiary, we've had another change in plans. Quite a number of these colonies have developed well, but several are still quite small. In terms of brood nest area, that is, maybe only 4 or 5 frames of brood. This has made me stop and think about what we're trying to achieve with the borage, the brambles and the heather crop this year, and I've decided to have a bit of a clear out and tidy up at the fishing lakes next weekend. This impacts on what I'm doing with the bees to the borage, the bramble crop and the heather. Let me explain. Both our fishing lakes apiaries are getting pretty wild and actually difficult to access and need some urgent work. Luckily, the fishing lakes manager loves our honey and is happy enough to take his tractor unit with the flail attachment into those apiaries and cut the grass and hedges back for me in exchange for a few jars of honey. For that to happen, I need to move all the colonies out and make room for him to drive around, safely avoiding all of the hive stands that we have in place. So the new plan is to take all of these colonies from the fishing lakes over to the borage next week. This frees up the apiary for the grass, hedge and tree cutting, and once that's done, all of the production colonies from the farm are coming back to the fishing lakes to benefit from the brambles and a nice freshly mown apiary for me to work in. These colonies will form the basis of those colonies that we'll take to the heather at the end of July. So with all of that in mind, late last week I inspected the colonies in preparation for taking them to the borage, and that's why we've finally taken off that small spring crop from some of them. Most of the fishing lakes colonies are splits. That's larger colonies split in half and one half getting the new queen, or in the case of colonies that failed to produce a new queen after swarming, both split halves of the queenless colony received the new queen. Some of these have raced away and are now sitting on 6 or more frames of brood in all stages, so I'm very happy with those and look forward to watching them closely on the borage to see how they perform. Now, it hasn't all gone to plan, and I'm always willing. I was going to say happy, but happy isn't really the right adjective to use. Anyway, it hasn't all gone swimmingly, and I've found another 2 drone-laying colonies in amongst the strong queen-right colonies. It's not the end of the world, but it's always a disappointment when you put a lot of care and effort into bringing these colonies along and they fail. I've never really had any success in trying to turn around a drone-laying queen colony. I've tried removing the old queen and adding a frame of eggs. I've tried uniting them with another colony. I've tried adding a new queen, but it's always been a bit hit and miss as to whether they come through or not. Add to that the mess they make of the frames, full of drone cells and quite unusable really. I find the simplest and quickest route to recovering the situation is to shake the bees out, sort the frames by either rendering the wax and boiling them or adding them to a bonfire and starting with new frames and foundation. Once the hive has been scraped and washed, new frames added and set up ready for reuse, it feels like I'm back in control of them again. There's nothing better than going into an apiary and looking around at all the colonies and thinking, yes, they're all queen right and ready for that summer nectar flow. Hives with 2 or 3 supers on, bees flooding out of each hive and flying up and out of the apiary as they head off to the brambles and the nectar reward that's on offer. Turning my attention to a different subject now, I wanted to tell you about my inspection regime for the summer months. Well, my inspection regime for a normal summer. I think there is a tendency for beginner beekeepers particularly to inspect every week from spring through to late autumn. Certainly that's what I did when I first started beekeeping. More through a fascination of what's happening in the beehive than any real understanding of what was required. There's a good argument for saying less is more here, particularly over the next 6 weeks or so. Colonies, for the most part, have finished any attempts at swarming. They've either successfully sidestepped the beekeeper and swarmed, as in my case, or the beekeeper has been able to manage the queen cell production process and prevent the colonies from reproducing for long enough that they eventually give up and settle into a phase of honey production, which is where we find ourselves now. Out of all of the colonies we have at full strength, only a couple are currently trying to make preparations for swarming. That's queen cell production. I would offer up an argument for not inspecting the brood nest in colonies through the next 6 weeks or so. That's through to the beginning of August, with the exception of 1 week, which I'll come to in a moment. My reason for saying this is the brood nest area, if left undisturbed from now through to the end of July, is, for the most part, a productive brood nest. But it has to be set up now in order to give the beekeeper confidence to leave them well alone. Now here I'm assuming the colonies are healthy, have low varroa numbers, and a laying queen with a good number of frames of brood, maybe something around 5 to 8 frames of eggs and brood in all stages. You'll hear beekeepers talk about bias, brood in all stages. Any odd frames that are blackened and old should be removed and replaced with frames of fresh foundation. I've taken to moving frames around in the brood box at this time based on something that I've read about heather honey, and I figured why not do it for the summer too. Apparently, one way of getting a good heather honey crop into the supers is to move the brood frames around so that any open brood or eggs are placed to the outside of the brood box, and any frames of sealed brood are placed in the middle of the brood box. This then prevents honey being stored in the outside frames. As the brood emerges from the sealed brood in the middle, the queen then necessarily needs to lay more eggs in it. The frames of open brood towards the outside are going to take around another 2 to 3 weeks before those bees emerge, by which time a lot of the honey stores will already be up in the supers, and with luck the bees will then be in the habit of taking the nectar straight up into the supers. Any brood boxes that don't have a full complement of frames of brood, that's 10 in my Langstroth hives, will have honey frames removed and foundation put in as replacement. Hopefully, with workers straight on it and building comb again for the queen to lay eggs in, somewhere in the middle of the brood box once more. At this point, I should add, common sense has to rule this decision-making process. Only colonies that are strong enough and growing well will get this treatment. Only colonies that are healthy and able to produce lots of wax and build comb. Don't try this with smaller or weakened colonies. I should say, don't try this at all unless you understand what I've been describing, and please don't email me complaining I've ruined your summer honey crop because I told you to experiment. For the record, I've not done much of this before. I'm not doing it with all of my colonies, just the strong ones, and I'll report back and shoot some videos to show you how things are going as we progress through the summer nectar flow. Inevitably, I will inspect some colonies this summer, as I'm going to be recording videos for our Patreon page and YouTube, but we will leave quite a number of colonies alone to simply get on with it. Just thinking back to my comments about not inspecting, here I'm referring to the brood box, not the supers. I'll certainly be keeping a close eye on the state of play in the supers and add boxes where needed, hopefully on a regular basis over the coming weeks. In summer, I always add a couple of supers at the start of that summer flow and then watch closely as they fill. There was a time where I would add them one at a time, but I always felt there was a point at which I maybe missed a nectar flow and colonies became congested. I don't want to have too many supers on a colony, or I find I'll end up with lots of partially filled frames, but I do want to maximise any honey crop that I might be able to take. A quick topic change here and a reminder to keep an eye out for varroa right now. Think, if you will, about the growth of your colony. Hopefully it's been fantastic and your hive is full of life. and has possibly reached that magical maximum potential just in time for the summer. Along with that, of course, comes, for some, an ever-increasing population of varroa mites. We now enter a critical time of the season, specifically thinking about varroa mites. As the colony grows, so does the varroa mite population. Probably not an issue for you right now, and possibly not an issue for you as you head into July and beyond. But as with so much in beekeeping, we're just one inspection away from the next challenge, and there's a colony collapse awaiting for you sometime in July if the varroa population isn't managed. Right now, there are few treatments you can use while there's a nectar flow on. We don't want to contaminate our honey, but we also don't want to leave our colonies with an ever-growing varroa population. Here, I advocate drone brood removal to you once more. This simple process can make a huge difference to your colony's health this winter, and now is the time to think about doing something about it. Grab yourself a frame with drone foundation, or if you don't have any, then a super frame or two will do just fine. Pop one or the other into the middle of your brood box with a reminder set on your phone, diary, calendar, or pinned to the hive, reminding you to remove the frame in 3 weeks' time. This will have a fantastic result in reducing the overall varroa population just in time for your winter bees production period in late July and into August. A low varroa count will mean strong winter bees in your hive and a much better chance of survival through to next spring, where we begin it all again. Finally, I wanted to tell you about a somewhat rare event for me that we discovered last week. It's not the first time it's happened, but I can probably count on both hands the number of times that I've found this in all the years and all the colonies that I've been beekeeping. 2 queens working side by side, well almost, perfectly happy and carrying on without a care in the world. Now this was not a mother-daughter supersedure setup, but rather 2 sisters working side by side. The original queen in this colony was one of last year's queens, marked with a red dot. I noticed the colony had swarmed, and it was left with just 1 queen cell, or so I thought. Obviously, I'd missed one. The queen cell I was aware of had a queen emerge, mate, and start laying eggs. I secured her in the bottom of 2 brood boxes with a queen excluder between them. This week I was inspecting to make sure all was well and discovered eggs in the top brood box. I thought the queen had inadvertently got into the top box. I spotted her and decided for the time being to leave her where she was as I checked the bottom box. To my surprise, not only were there eggs in the bottom box, but another unmarked queen. Both brood boxes had a decent amount of brood in all stages, plenty of eggs, and the colony was fast approaching gargantuan proportions, so I decided to split them and create 2 from 1. A nice little bonus when sometimes it feels like the season is determined to work against you. Well, that's it for this week. Don't forget to check out my website www.norfolk-honey.co.uk and for my latest videos and podcasts with more updates, tips and techniques, it's the same Patreon page, www.patreon.com/Norfolk Honey. And remember, I'm Stewart Spinks and that was Beekeeping Short and Sweet.